If every time you make a lo-fi beat and it doesn't sound all that lo-fi and you don't know why, today I'm going to be helping you out. I'm going to be showing you guys 6 different things that you can do to help you achieve that lo-fi aesthetic that you are looking for. So I have this beat here that I played for you guys in the intro. Starting off, one of the things that you can do is pitch shift your sample. Now, what is the significance of this and how does it make your beat actually sound more lo-fi? One of the things that I like to do when I'm trying to come up with an idea for a lo-fi beat is take my sample, whatever I'm working with, and pitch shift it down. Now, why do I pitch shift it down and not up? One of the staples of a lo-fi beat is having a warm feel to it, like I'm sure you guys have heard people describe. As well, there's a sort of lack of polish when it comes to lo-fi beats. Pitching your sample down is easily going to help you achieve both of those things. So let's open up an EQ here. This is the frequency spectrum of our sample when it's played at normal pitch. Now let's see how it looks when it's played at a lower pitch. You guys can see, compared to the sample when it's played at its original pitch, there's a lot less going on in the high end of the frequency spectrum. There's also a lot more going on in the mid-range of our frequency spectrum. And this is basically what pitch shifting does. We're basically taking our entire frequency spectrum and we're shifting it up or down. So pitching down instantly creates a framework that perfectly fits the aesthetic of a lo-fi beat. We have a mid-range that's going to be a little bit more dense, so we're going to have a little bit more of a warm feel to the sound. As well, we have a lot less high end, so it's going to remove that pristine, that polish from the high end of our sample and just make it feel a little bit more lo-fi, a little bit more gritty. By no means am I saying that you have to do this every single time, that you have to pitch down, but if you pitch up, you should understand what exactly is going to happen. You're going to have a lot more work to do in order to fill that mid-range up because it's going to be a lot more empty comparatively. As well, we're going to have a lot more going on in the high end of the frequency range, which we're eventually going to have to cut back anyways in order to achieve that lo-fi aesthetic. Speaking of cutting frequencies, that's actually my second tip. Whenever I want to achieve that lo-fi aesthetic, what I usually do is I go in and I start cutting off different frequencies using EQs and filters. So you guys can see here's my snare. I have everything above 6,000 hertz cut off. Same thing with my sample here. You guys can see I cut off a lot of the high end as well as a bit of the low end as well. The idea being is I want to achieve the exact same thing as when I pitch a sample down. I want to remove a lot of that high end pristine, that polish, just to help the beat sound a little bit more gritty and grimy. At times as well, I'll root out a lot of the low end, having a super clean bass line, a super clean and polished bass tone cutting through your mix might not be the best idea to achieve that lo-fi aesthetic. At times what you want is a sort of a weaker bass tone in your song. You sort of want the beat to sound like it's coming out of an old garbage speaker. And so having a very clean, very polished bass tone as well might not be the best idea for achieving that lo-fi aesthetic. So now that you've gone through your beat and you've cut out a lot of the high end and a lot of the instruments, what you might feel is an imbalance in your beat. There's not a lot going on in the high end now. And this leads me to tip number 3. This is something that I mentioned in a prior video on making lo-fi drums, which I'll link right here. And it's the idea of introducing noise into your beat. There is a good practical reason why you hear a lot of lo-fi beats having a static or tape sound in them. For example, in this beat here, I have this sound of a vinyl crackling. Not only does it match the aesthetic of a lo-fi beat like it's playing from an old school source like a vinyl or a tape, but it also does something practical in that it also fills up the high end in our frequency spectrum. So you guys can see here, this vinyl sound has a lot going on in the high end, and if I introduce it into the beat, it's going to help fill that void that's going to exist now that we went into all of our instruments and cut off a lot of the high end. This is going to help replace all that high end in a more unique way. And so this might be something that you want to do to help bring a little bit more balance to your beat and into the final mix. But there's another way that we can introduce some high-end noise into my beat, which leads me to my next tip, and that's adding distortion. In this example, what I did was I introduced a very specific type of distortion, which is called bit crushing. This is how the main sample sounds without bit crushing. And this is how it sounds with the bit crushing turned on. You guys can hear there's just a lot more going on in the high end now. So what bit crushing basically does is it degrades the quality of our sound. You guys can think of it like what's happening in this picture here. The resolution and quality is getting worse and worse, and we're basically doing the exact same thing to our audio. But one of the features that comes along with bit crushing is the ability to play with the bit rate of the sound, which is going to help add a layer of noise into our beat like I was talking about. So you guys can see here. I can play with the bit rate to add more noise in. So two birds, one stone. Not only am I playing around with the clarity of the actual sound and I'm degrading it to help achieve a more lo-fi gritty aesthetic, I'm also introducing noise into the sound in order to help achieve a more overall better balance in the end. Generally speaking though, bit crushing isn't something that you have to do, but I would recommend introducing some level of distortion to your beat somewhere. Now one of the things with this plugin specifically is, for whatever reason, I'm not sure whether it's a feature or a bug, but it also takes our sound and puts it into mono. And this is another tip that you guys can use in order to help your beat sound a little bit more lo-fi. Having great stereo separation with your sounds in a typical beat is usually a great idea. But again, with lo-fi, that might not be something that we want to do. Again, if we want a little bit more of that muddiness, a little bit less of that clarity in our beat overall, taking all of our sounds and putting it into a more narrow stereo space might be a good idea. As you guys can see on the master, I have stereo tools put on. You guys can see at the middle point here, that's normal stereo separation, and 0% here is mono. And so I sort of edged the overall stereo separation of the overall beat to be a little bit more closer to mono. And so this might be something that you want to do in order to help your beat feel as though it's a little bit more muddy and not have as much clarity. Again, to achieve that lo-fi aesthetic that we're looking for. Another common technique that people like to do is introducing some sort of modulation into their beat. One common one is vibrato, and what that means is when you take the pitch of a sound and you slowly fluctuate it up and down. And a common plugin to do this is Isotope Vinyl, which a lot of people use. So this plugin is absolutely free, and to use it to achieve this type of modulation, what you want to do is turn up the warp depth right here. And you guys can also play with the RPM right here to change the speed of the overall fluctuation. As well, you can play with the warp model over here to play around with the shape. Another technique that I like to use is flanging. So you guys can hear how the sample sounds without flanging on. And now this is how it sounds with flanging on. So we get this cool wishy-washy feeling that you guys can especially hear in the high end. So if I isolate the high end, you guys can hear. And if I turn the flanging off, the high end has this sort of constant boring feel to it, but if I turn the flanging on, we get this cool effect on the high end. So this is something that I like to do personally. Now lastly, the final tip is introducing some really aggressive compression onto your beat. So you guys can see on the master here, I added some multi-band compression on. So if I turn this off and I use something less aggressive, you guys can hear the difference. And now with multi-band compression, it can make a pretty big difference in how our beat sounds. I should mention though, the point of this technique is not to achieve some sort of clarity or make the mix in the end sound very good. The idea is more so to achieve or pursue a very specific type of aesthetic. This creates a lot of pumping into our beat as well. It makes our instruments sound a lot less well-defined just because we have a huge wall of sound now. I used this multi-band compression and I basically went into the presets and used one of the mastering presets here. I made small adjustments as well. The thing that I really like about multi-band compression is it easily lets me control how much of each frequency range I want to compress using these dials up here. This easily lets me control the high end to get the feel of the beat right where I want it. Fundamentally, it's an easy way to control how lo-fi I want the beat to feel. Yet another way that we can control and reduce the clarity of the beat to help achieve that lo-fi aesthetic. So hopefully these are tips that you can use in order to make your beat sound more lo-fi. If you have any tips of your own, please feel free to share them in the comments down below. As usual guys, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. My free drum kit is available to download in the description box below as well. And I will see you guys next Tuesday.